afternoon, everyone. For those who are joining us for the first time in this live session, welcome to Immersion Plus. My name's David Borean from NEC. I'm delighted that you've all taken the time to join us for this presentation. We're all navigating through such challenging and uncertain times, and governments and businesses are making decisions and confronting issues they've never had to think about previously. That's being well publicised in the media. I'd actually now like to take a moment to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Mike Mrdak, who's the non-executive chair of NEC Australia. Mike recently joined NEC after quite a stellar career as an Australian public servant, most recently the Secretary of the Department of Communications and the Arts, and previously the Secretary of the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development. In 2016, Mike received an Order of Australia for his services to our community, and today, as non-exec chair for NEC Australia, I'm really delighted to welcome Mike as he shares some thoughts on how we take a long, hard look at our future. When we conclude Mike's presentation, if you've got any questions, please pop them into the Q&A or the chat line, and we'll come back and deal with those at the end of the presentation. Please enjoy the time with Mike.
Thanks very much, David, and thank you all for your time today in this terrific opportunity to talk about what the world might look like coming out of COVID and the current international and Australian domestic situation. The COVID-19 pandemic is undoubtedly a moment in history, and like all moments in history, it'll have some absolutely unforeseen outcomes that we couldn't have imagined. But it'll also accelerate a lot of trends which have been underway for some time. And as David said, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what I see is going to be some of the impacts for our community and also our businesses, both digital and non-digital, as the world goes forward. And like all moments like this, it's going to be an opportunity, I think, to how technology can really address some of the problems that are emerging and what things we need to deal with as we go forward post-COVID. And I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to join NEC, a company with over a century of service globally in addressing problems, but also over 50 years in Australia as bring technology to solve some of the major issues in our community. So what do we know so far about the impacts of COVID and where this is going to take us? Firstly, this is a period of great economic upheaval. We're now entering what will be a prolonged economic recession, both globally and for Australia. And importantly, this is the first recession to hit the global digital economy, the knowledge economy. Previous recessions in Australia since the Second World War have largely taken a toll on our manufacturing and our blue-collar labour workforce. This is the first time in history where the knowledge economy will be the first impacted. And the services economy in areas like hospitality, aviation, tourism, and digital services are being worse affected than other sectors of the economy so far. Secondly, we've all recognised the importance of digital investment. As a nation, if we hadn't have built the NBN and we hadn't had the substantial investment in 3 and 4G mobile broadband, most Australian white-collar workers today would be on JobKeeper. That's the reality, and I think the Australian community now understands much better the importance of digital investment for all those reasons. And it's an economic upheaval that will have geographically different impacts. We've already seen how it's impacting the knowledge economy and the service sectors, disproportionately affecting our major cities. But it's also affecting globally different areas, different ways. And the responses to the virus internationally are leading to different responses and will lead to different economic and social outcomes. And we know that the global pandemic will already exacerbate a problem of relatively low levels of business investment. And that's why government is going to take a larger and larger role in all of our lives. As we've already seen, government in Australia is underpinning so much of our economic activity at the moment. And in the future, we're going to see much more involvement of government, both in regulation and in our economic underpinnings. And that's probably going to start to reverse what's been the last 40 years of thinking on the role of government in our economy and society. For our community, we already know COVID is leading to major behavioural changes, a lot of which were already starting to happen, but they've been accelerated. We're working from home, and that's become accepted for knowledge and service workers. As a number of our speakers have commented this morning, it's going to become much more a feature of our lives. We've already reduced major discretionary travel habits that we've developed over the last 30 years, and we're changing our travel habits. International borders have closed for Australia and will likely remain closed for some time. And all of our notions of free international movement are going to be challenged for a long time and will probably never return to the way they were pre-February. And we reduced peak travel in our major cities, particularly on public transport. We've changed our view of the importance of working in a space called the office or the workplace, and we've increased the use of active transport, such as walking and cycling already. And we're already thinking much more locally about what we do and what we buy. There are also geopolitical structural changes taking place on national security, trade, how national borders operate. And we're seeing a substantial breakdown in international cooperation, something that we've always presumed would continue to improve since the Second World War. That's now really under challenge, and that's been accelerated by COVID. And importantly, businesses and the community are thinking about supply chains quite differently. How long they are, how complex they are, how reliable and stable they are. In Australia, we've been somewhat surprised about what we make and what we don't make here anymore by the COVID experience. But then what it's leading us to think about much more is how do we secure our supply chains? How do we give trust into our supply chains much more strongly? And we've reinforced the importance of the safety and security of our digital networks. We know that safe and secure networks are critical to what we do, and that's been reinforced by COVID. And we've also come to value our open spaces more. And we want as a community to be able to go into safe places. And finally, we've also got to come to grips with the fact that one of the key drivers of our economy for the last 30 years, which is migration, has come to an end, at least for the short term. So we're going to have to deal with a world where we're no longer going to be able to access population growth, which has really underpinned a lot of our economic growth. For much of the last 15 years, we've had one of the largest population growths in the world per capita. And that's been driven largely by migration, bringing in highly skilled people from all over the world. That's going to change, and that will have implications for business and also how our community operates, and most importantly, for our economic growth. So how are we dealing with this? Well, there's some community anecdotes we're all dealing with every day, which I think give us good examples of the sorts of things we're going to have to deal with. Firstly, we've changed our discretionary travel habits and the way we travel to work. And it was interesting, just before the Melbourne lockdown in the last week or so, private vehicle travel was getting back to pre-COVID levels. But while we were back on the roads, principally in single vehicles, our use of public transport had dropped by 40 to 50%. Our use of aviation had fallen by over 96%. So what was driving that was not the economic recovery. We were getting back in cars because we felt they were safer. And that's an important underpinning of what we're going to be thinking about in the future, about how we plan our traffic systems in our cities. We know as our workplaces have changed, we've had the Teams and Zoom effect. People feel safe at home. And one of the things we're already seeing is people are starting to worry, and have worried for some weeks now, about the safety of going back into a physical workspace. And that'll be an issue we're going to have to manage. That has implications for our CBDs and the concentration of where we place work in our cities and our regional towns. People will continue to be anxious about their safety. The other key trend that's been accelerated is the number of full-time hours worked continues to decline. This has been the case for about nearly 20 years. Full-time hours worked has been declining, both in Australia and across the global developed economies. But this has been exacerbated. And increasingly post-COVID, we can expect a larger number of people working less than full-time hours. And finally, the community all recognises that while it's been fun for a while to be socially interacting by video conference, it's got limitations. And as a community, we want to get back to physical interaction with people. Zoom drinks are only fun for a little while. Nothing beats the physical interaction with colleagues and friends and family. So what are some of my thoughts on what this means for the future? And what have we learned so far? Firstly, we're going to put a higher premium on safety and assurance to get us back into our offices, into shopping centres, into sports arenas, into community activities. We want to be assured about the safety from a health perspective of re-engaging back with the community. And there's increased consumer caution. Consumers want to be able to deal with firms and businesses they trust, particularly locally based businesses. And we've come to place a higher premium on being able to access facilities which are virus-free, and we are prepared to accept controls. And we've already seen the way in which people have been prepared to accept conditions on their access to stadiums and sports events, to shopping centres and other places. We've become prepared to accept digitally digital access controls, temperature testing and the like as a condition of entry back into these valued public spaces. Secondly, government will be a greater feature of our lives than we've ever imagined. Throughout most of my public service career, we've spent a lot of time trying to remove government regulation and government out of activities. The one thing we know at the moment coming out of this crisis is government will both be an important economic underpinning, and we're seeing that with the Australian government's fiscal support for the economy, but also government regulation will increasingly shape our environment much more so than it has in the past decades. And matters like how we pay for all that will become a bigger feature of our public policy debate. But we've also got a growing tendency to accept government regulation, and that's really about how we accept health and medical advice about what we need to do for the future. For business, we know there's going to be a lot more thinking about long-term partnerships, about our business supply chains and our international relationships. Who we partner with, where we source our goods and services will all become much more important in terms of stability and certainty and trust than they have been in the past. And who we trust in the future to help us work through problems, I think is going to become a really big feature of who we do business with. And trust in government and in our supply chains will be a key feature for us. We've also changed our view of digital transformation. We've surprised ourselves over the last 3 months about what we can do digitally. We've not only worked from home, we've seen our kids learn from home, and we've started to become much more accepting of the fact that a lot of businesses will go digital just to provide even the most basic services we once accepted we had to go to them for. And so we've shifted our digital behaviour. We've adapted digital technology much more readily, whether it's online learning right through to e-commerce and home delivery of basic services. We've taken up virtual experiences and communication, and we've now come to realise that the digital technology is more than just entertainment at home. It actually underpins our jobs and our social interaction and our learning. So we've accelerated that much more rapidly, as a number of speakers today have outlined. And we've also created new relationships between our employers and employees. Working from home, remote working, much more flexible work changes relationships, both at work and the responsibilities of employers. At the same time, we're going to see much more of a debate about equality and inequality of access to the digital world. The one thing we've really recognised over the last few months is that there are varying levels of connectivity available to Australians. Some Australians have high levels of connectivity and digital skills, others don't. And we've seen particularly around some schools in more disadvantaged or regional areas where they haven't been able to shift to learning as much as some others have been able to do. That's going to raise a real debate about the things like automation and digitalisation in the future and the equity of access to those services. And connectivity, whether it's through NBN or 5G mobile, is going to become much more an issue for making sure that we connect the whole country in a way that the whole country can participate in economic rebuilding. And finally, I think corporate behaviour is going to have to change. Reputation and trust to brands will become much more important. And the penalties for not having robust trusted systems will be higher, both through consumers walking away from businesses that don't provide cyber security and safety in their transactions, but also brands that breach trust with the community around the value of their services and their behaviour. And government regulation will be more ready to step in and regulate business than it probably has been for some decades if that trust and that behaviour is not appropriate. And we're going to worry a lot more in business about things like investing in data and our data analytical capabilities to build new customer experiences and how we use data analysis to actually drive new business opportunities. And we're going to deal with not just remote working, but much more flexible work arrangements. And we're going to worry a lot more about our supply chains and who we trust as long-term partners. We'll need to build much more resilience into both our security and the way in which our supply lines are constructed to make sure we don't face the crisis of supply we've had over the last few months in key areas, and that we're working with trusted partners that have a long-term view of our business. So both diversifying supply chains and also better contingency planning for risk scenarios. And finally, I think that this is also going to be an issue of how we make sure that people have trust in the customer services they're getting in their homes. So what does all this mean, in my view, for digital services and digital technologies? Firstly, we know we're going to continue to see an acceleration of digital technology take-up and transformation. We're getting very used to and getting better at telemedicine, home learning, remote work. Those will accelerate as trends as we start to build better cyber safety and security around some of those systems, and importantly, we address some of the inequities of access, then they'll become permanent features of how we operate. Business will increasingly move to virtual online platforms for so much more of its customer activity and customer services. And it's more than just online commerce. It's going to be a lot more service delivery through what we would regard as service sector industries. Human interaction industries is going to move much more online. So what are the key directions for a business like NEC or other businesses in the Australian marketplace, in my view, coming out of COVID as we recover from this momentous event? Firstly, we know we've got to do more to protect people. We've got to give them trust and surety around access and health control. We're going to need to make sure our business continuity systems are stronger. We're going to automate where possible, and we're going to have to review our procurement and distribution lines to get better reliability. We're going to change our customer systems to be much more customer focused around online and digital services. We're going to have to give brand and supply assurance, and we're going to have to give data security and cyber security assurance, probably to a level which we haven't had in the past, to make sure consumers stick with our brand. And we're going to move more customers onto digital services and more of our own staff onto digital working environments. And corporate social responsibility will also change. The last 40 years have been dominated by what's called the Chicago School of Thought, which came out of the US in the 1970s, which was really that the primary responsibility of business is to a shareholder. And all other things flow from that. Well, I think what COVID has shown us is our community has a different view about corporate business responsibility, and what the community is going to be looking for is much more business long-term community involvement, much more surety around business long-term partnerships, and importantly, the way in which businesses operate as good corporate citizens will become much more important to the value and the loyalty to the brand. And we're going to see much more increased workplace flexibility, and probably a much more of an on-demand workforce than what we've seen to date. And that raises a whole range of concerns for our community about stability and surety of work. But in a volatile economic environment, particularly in the global environment we face, we're going to see more businesses looking for on-demand workforces and out-of-office remote workforces than what we've seen to date. And a couple of our speakers already this morning have taken us through some of those areas, such as in customer support services, but also in the way in which deliver customer experience much differently. And as I mentioned earlier, supply chains are going to be re-examined as we explore new delivery and inventory management and production and distribution models. And we've got to recognise the changes in work habits and changes in our urban shape of our cities that are going to result from this new digital environment we're working to. And innovation by business is going to have to continue to be the case. And let me finish by focusing on two areas which are already seeing the most immediate change coming out of this environment we're operating in, but which will really be some of the early adopters and accelerators of digital technology. And that's both in smart workplaces and smart cities environments. On smart workplaces, I've said earlier, people will not return to shopping centres, community centres, to workplaces unless they've got a high level of assurance about the health and the health situation there, but also who's in that environment with them. So we're going to see much more, I think, of development of products like NEC's iQuarantine system, which involves a very basic and simple system using smartphone technology to be able to identify people who need to be in quarantine, who are in quarantine, and that we can assure that they are in the right place at the right time, and importantly, utilising that technology to maintain checks on their health. And we're going to see iQuarantine and those type of products, I think, become much more fundamental to how we operate in our system. We're also going to see changes to how we operate our buildings. And I've been interested to see over the last, as I've seen some of the products that NEC has, for instance, NEC Tokyo headquarters has already rolled out this week completely touchless entry systems. No more passes, no more guards at the front desk, all using AI and facial recognition to validate people's access and entry into a building. Completely touchless, removes the need for a whole range of intervention points. Also using technology at NEC for how we manage our space within our buildings, that people can use digital technology and camera technology to see what's in an environment before they go there, to check on levels of congestion, of how many people are there, do they meet social distancing requirements, checking on whether rooms are available, how crowded they are, and the like, being available in real time. So people can make decisions about how they manage their personal safety and their work environment. and using facial recognition to make sure that people accessing areas are safe to do so. Again, contactless but verifiable and accurate systems that enable people to get a high level of surety. And I think they're going to be much more important to be rolled as we roll those types of technologies out in the future into areas like our community spaces. I think we've learned a lot and we've become much more comfortable about the need for that technology to give us verification and assuredness as we go forward. And on smart cities, we're going to be spending a lot of time rebuilding confidence in our public transport systems. While the health crisis is going on, we're going to be limiting access to our public transport systems to make sure we maintain social distancing. But in the future, we're going to have to rebuild that faith in the system. And the way to do that is through technology. Technology which can remove touch points. So we'll see much more, I think, ticketing, turnstile systems, gate systems, which are contactless and don't involve any touch points by the consumer. We're using facial recognition and card access. We can make sure those places are seamless in terms of managing people flow and maximising capacity at the same time as making sure that they're safer. And we'll go contactless, using visual facial recognition and unique identifiers, which will make sure we're not only doing electronic toll collection, fare collection, but we can actually validate who's in an area and also what sort of health condition they're in as they go into those areas. And thirdly, we'll use much more sensor and data analysis. Sensors are sending massive streams of data to data analytical centres, which will enable us to provide better real-time information to travellers and people walking our streets around information systems about congestion and who's in areas, how crowded they are, but also, importantly, how more efficient travel can be to certain areas. And we'll do more on smart parking and smart waste management, street lighting, and a whole range of areas where our smart technology will enable us to better manage our systems in our cities and our workplaces and our community interaction to make sure we're getting the right balance between safety assurance that people want and productivity, which we need to rebuild our economy. So thank you very much for the opportunity today by NSC to really start to focus on how we can bring some of these technologies, which have been there for a while and been through development, but as speakers have said today, I'm going to accelerate their application to deal with what we now see as the challenge of the future. Thanks very much.
Mike, thank you very much for your time, and thanks very much for sharing your deep insights on such a critical area, and the continued growth and insights that you will bring our organisation will no doubt have a rippling effect across our organisation internally, but certainly with our customers and our partners. So thanks for sharing those insights. Mike, there is one question that's come through, and possibly people that are now pontificating on some of your thoughts there might want to ask a couple of others. We've got a few minutes. I will make mention that Mike will be available following this presentation in the virtual networking lounge, which is located in the toolbar back into the main area of the platform. If you click Meet the Speakers in the chat room, you'll see Mike will be available quite shortly. So as soon as this presentation finishes. For the time being, Mike, there is a couple of questions. So the first one is, what do you feel are the main hurdles in creating digital government, one that is more oriented towards citizen needs?
A lot of it deals to two, and they've both been exacerbated by this COVID situation. One is government has traditionally built systems which are very much trying to minimise administrative burden inside government a lot of the time and minimise cost. Part of it is to really shift that focus, and we've already seen in, say, New South Wales what happens when government puts much more of a focus on the customer experience and what customer needs are than basically the building of the systems, which tended to predominate in my time when I was running systems in government. We tended to try and find systems that worked efficiently for us into meeting government outcomes. I think what we've seen in the last few years is a much greater focus on the customer end of it, and so that's got to continue. And also, there's a lag in government about taking up a lot of digital technology simply because of cost and the need to deal with legacy systems, which for government are huge. If you think about something like the Department of Social Services in Australia, the legacy systems around the social security payments are really large and really risky. And that's a really big issue for government. And you can imagine, as they're currently going through a modernisation process, something like 12 million Australians each fortnight get some degree of social income support payment from the Australian government. If that system doesn't work every second Thursday, it has an enormous impact on so many Australians. So the risk issue is large, the cost issue is large, and switching that around to getting a bit more of a customer focus, and I think we've seen that a little bit with some great examples at the Australian government level. ATO, for instance, has done a terrific job on JobKeeper, using what I think they would still say are some clunky systems. And New South Wales is a good example, I think, in Australia, what you can do when you actually change the whole nature of the customer experience, including helping people navigate the digital world with another human being helping them through that. So we put people at the front of customer service centres to guide them into a digital environment. It makes a huge difference in getting people's confidence up.
Yeah, I think just to extend on that then, there's a question from Mark with regards to privacy and what kinds, just your view on this, I guess, what kinds of privacy issues arise in response to the forms of sensorisation that you're describing. So particularly with regards to the wider spread of facial recognition and that type of technology. So just your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, there's no doubt there are privacy issues. In a country like Australia, people are always worried about, quite rightly, about who has access to the data and on what conditions, particularly where that data is going to large data analytical centres. But there has been a change. I think people have recognised that they've made a trade-off for their data in terms of some of the global search engines and in terms of some of the global social media platforms. People have become, I think, aware of, particularly the last year or so, of just how much data is being collected and how that's being utilised by those private platforms. But people still want to have quite heavy levels of assurance that someone is managing those privacy issues on their behalf. And that's where I think governments will increasingly regulate in this area, and we're already starting to see that in terms of the digital social media platforms. But secondly, around privacy issues of facial recognition, the community will want to be satisfied that that material is only being used for areas that the community has agreed it should be used for. So if it's about access control, where they get to see the benefit of that, I think the community will be comfortable, but knowing that someone is regulating to make sure that's taking place for the right reasons, and the data is being securely stored in a way that is not going to lead to breakdowns of both their personal and public privacy, and secondly, that is not being misused for purposes for which they haven't agreed. So I think making sure that those parameters are set and that there is independent regulation taking place through the privacy guidelines and legislation and enforceable by governments. And I said earlier, I think one of the things we will see coming out of COVID is a much greater level of government regulation of these types of areas than probably what we envisaged happening and being done by governments pre-COVID.
Yeah. Mike, there's another question. It is in relation, it's from Jason. He says, "Hi Mike, how do you think the move to shared services in public service will help or stifle the attempts to better make use of technology?"
Look, shared services I think is important, but it's got to be seen as being driven by the better customer outcome rather than simply a cost-saving exercise. I think certainly in my time in government we saw a lot of exercises where it was driven by reducing cost, and which had quite a negative outcome on consumer and also the way in which the public service was able to roll out services. So I think shared services has got a lot of promise. It's certainly the coordination of procurement and service delivery. I think it needs to be done much more centrally across government. That we've seen the benefit of that, provided it is not driven by a fiscal outcome. It's actually been driven by a service outcome. And I think that's the crucial thing. And we've seen in drawing on the New South Wales experience, their shift to customer service centres has cost them a lot in budget spending, but it's been the right thing to do because it's actually led to a better outcome. And if that's what's driving shared services, that's the right way to go.
Thanks, Mike. That's great. Thank you for those questions and the response to those questions and those insights. As I said a moment ago, Mike will be available in the Meet the Speakers chat room, available in the networking lounge up on the toolbar. A short poll's now going to appear on your screen. For those that are seeing this for the first time, it's just a 10-second poll. It's to ask 3 questions. Did this presentation add value to you today? From 0 to 5. Please be kind to Mike. I'm now more informed about the subject matter, 0 to 5, and I'd like to know more about this subject. So if you could take a moment just to fill that in, that'd be great. I'll come back to you in just a jiffy on that. While we're just collecting those responses, don't forget the exhibition hall right now. There's a whole range of content that's available. It's downloadable. It's available for you and for so many people from our sponsors, wide range of services, NEC, technology services, our partners and so forth. Right now, one of our partners for today, Juniper, is offering an incentive to visit their on-demand webinar on proximity tracing. And simply by completing a short survey, you'll receive a free mist drink bottle. So that's just for completing the survey. And then you're also in the chance to win a $150 JB Hi-Fi gift card. So while we take a look at the responses to the poll, which is coming up now, I think it'll be appearing in a moment, those responses, there they are. So Mike, yeah, look, it looks like about close to 95% of the audience said that they did get some value out of the presentation today, which is fantastic. Again, close to 90% of people have ranked that they're now far more informed about the matter that you spoke of today, and that close to 70% would like to know more about the subject. So if anyone does want to chat to Mike, please do so in the networking lounge, and we thank him for his time. So coming up soon, in fact at 2 o'clock today, there's one of our country's great human assets, NEC ambassador and wheelchair tennis champion Dylan Alcott, AO, who's going to talk to us about his life. I'll look forward to doing a Q&A with him. And again, thanks very much for joining us for this presentation. See you soon.
Thank you.